Hello. In my quiet time this morning, I was reading from Genesis chapter 21, which talks about the story of Hagar. Some of you might be familiar with the story of Hagar. She was one of Abraham's servants. And when Abraham and Sarah discovered after many, many years that they couldn't have children, Abraham, with Sarah's instigation, took Hagar to himself in order to bear a child, and a child was born by the name of Ishmael. What then happened after that, of course, as you probably know, is that Sarah then fell pregnant. And she then grew very jealous of Hagar and her son Ishmael and suggested to Abraham that he send her away. And that's the passage that we then get to that I read this morning. I'm just going to read it to you. It's from Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 to 19. Early the next morning, Abraham got some food and a bottle of water. The bottle was made out of animal skin. He gave the food and water to Hagar, and he placed them on her shoulders. Then he sent her away with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the bottle was gone, she put the boy under a bush. Then she went off and sat down nearby. She was about as far away as a person can shoot an arrow. She thought, I can't stand to watch the boy die. As she sat nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying. Then the angel of God called out to Hagar from heaven, and he said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up. Take him by the hand. I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened Hagar's eyes. She saw a well of water. So she went and filled the bottle with water, and she gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and learned to shoot with a bow. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got him a wife from Egypt. Hagar's name actually means forsaken. And of course she was forsaken, wasn't she, by Abraham? But she wasn't forsaken by God. And what really struck me when I read that passage this morning was how Hagar acted out of some of the awful things that had happened to her. And she acted as one forsaken. So when she ran out of water, she kind of acted out of the fear that she would be forsaken and her son would be forsaken and that they would perish. And so she left her son under a bush. That awful mother's pain and angst of not wanting to see her son suffer, and so went a distance away so she didn't have to be right next to him as he died. But then, of course, we hear from that passage how God heard Ishmael crying. God saw, he knew what was happening. And then he reaches out to Hagar and he says to her, It's okay, I've got this. These aren't quite the words, I'm paraphrasing, but I've got this. And notice what happens. Hagar's eyes are opened and she sees a well. Now the well probably was there all along, but she was so consumed by her fear that she allowed that to take over. It stopped her from moving on. And my question to myself and my question to you is, when do we at sometimes allow some of the bad things that might have happened to us, or some of the fears that can paralyze us, when do we allow those to shield us from seeing what is really there, from seeing where God is really leading? And so I just ask you today, what are some of the fears that hold you back? What are some of the fears that maybe mean you don't have your eyes open to what God has placed in front of you, to what God is calling you to do, to the gifts that God has for you? God had the well ready. He wasn't forsaking Hagar or her son. He had great plans for them. Hagar simply had to open her eyes. And rather than living out of that fear of yet again being forsaken, to open her eyes and see the God that puts the wells in front of us and says, take my hand, I have a plan for you. So you might want to spend a few moments just thinking, what is it that can hold me back? What are some of the fears that I have that might hold me back from taking hold of what God has for me? Abraham might have forsaken Hagar, but God hadn't forsaken Hagar. And that's the important thing, because it's God who, in the end, gives us life. The challenge, not to live out of our fear, but to look for the wells that God places in front of us, to ask him afresh to open our eyes to see them. God bless you as you look for your wells today.